Hello, my name is ADH, or a Dragon Hunter. I was able to participate in the 300 person and the 100 person siege test this last Thursday. And I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of how that went and my experience in it. First, we're going to talk about the alpha systems. Did they work? Did they not work? Then we're going to cover the bugs that we encountered during this. Then we're going to talk about the differences in the 300 person versus the 100 person and how that affected certain bugs. And then we're going to talk a little bit of a roadmap of further down the line things I'd like to see involved in the siege system. For the alpha systems, we're going to talk about siege equipment, capture points, gates, dragons, spawns, and then, like I said, we're going to conclude it with bugs. For the differences in the 300 person versus the 100 person, we're going to talk about how the lag was different, how certain interactions were better or worse. For the roadmap, we're going to talk about map design, map scale, throne room concept, going in and capturing the throne room, the 250 v 250, and then certain balancing aspects. Obviously, we can't get too in-depth in balancing because it requires lots of testing and lots of stuff that we're not at yet. But I'll give a quick overview of some things that you can already see. All right, so let's talk about the alpha systems. Let's talk about the siege equipment. First, we'll talk about the ballistas. So the ballistas were positioned on the walls. There was 2 layers of walls that had ballista. You'd have your so you spawn inside the keep. You would move outside the keep. Outside the keep was your first layer of walls, which had ballista on it, and then you'd go beyond those walls, and there was a lower courtyard area and encircled by walls, and that layer of walls also had ballista on it. They came in these boxes. They would start off as packed boxes, and then you would unpack them and shoot. They worked great. They would shoot where you pointed. They would do about 200 damage a shot in a little AoE, and they had about a 45-degree angle on how they could turn. Only defenders could interact with them. Attackers could not get on them and then spin them around and shoot you. Even if attackers could get on them, because of the 45-degree limited angle, you would not have been able to shoot defenders unless you got to the second layer of walls and shot down into the courtyard. The other siege equipment was trebuchets, which also worked. Trebuchets functioned in the manner that you would shoot a fixed distance no matter where you were, and they would just shoot the direction that you were pointed. And they had a much larger AoE, it felt like, that they would do damage in, and they also did about 250 to 300 damage, which I also believe you could crit on, which you could do up to 600 damage. So those were really useful for clearing out crowds, considering everyone's max HP was 1,000. At the highest, 1,008. So those work. Check mark on siege equipment. Capture points. You could capture them. You would go up to them and you had to hold them for 3 minutes, and then the NPC would change. The NPC that was guarding it, you'd have to kill him or fight him or distract him. He would change to a friendly NPC, and the flags on the capture point themselves would switch as well. The gates, you could break down the gates either with the trebuchets or with auto-attacking. And by auto-attacking, I mean holding your Q button or holding your LMB button, which we can hold now, which is great. The dragons did work. There were some problems with the dragons. So the fire dragon in the center of the map would take only... it would not take damage. It wouldn't take damage at all. Couldn't interact with it. But the poison dragon and the ice dragon worked great. They had about 2 million HP each, and had we had the numbers, we would have been able to kill them. I should say, with the fire dragon, it's not that you couldn't interact with him, you just couldn't damage him. He would still whoop your ass. So the spawns, some of the spawn systems worked. When you spawned, you would spawn at your default spawn location. You could not teleport to the capture points that you had captured previously, which I believe is the intent. So that didn't work yet, but spawning in general, you would die. There was a bug associated with spawning, but we're about to get into bugs, so I'll talk about it there. The spawns were located at a camp for the attackers. You were out kind of in the wilderness in a camp. And for the defenders, they were located in a room behind the throne room, maybe a 10-second walk to the throne room. So let's talk about the bugs that we encountered. For all of these, I'm going to be talking about specifically the 300-person test, because the 100-person test was much better when it came to bugs. That may have been because we already knew all the bugs and we purposefully tried to avoid them. Or it may have been because the servers were less stressed and so we had less encounters of the bug. But for the 300-person test, let's talk about lag first. We had some frame hitching. Personally, I did. I talked to some other people and they also did. But overall, the frame rate was good. There was really no lag when it came to interacting with your combat with someone or interacting just moving through the world. Really wasn't any lag other than the occasional frame hitch. There was a bug associated with targeting the enemy team. You could target the other team. I figured this out later into the test if you were flagged up for PvP. But if you were not flagged up for PvP, you would have to manually click on the other whoever you were trying to target. You could not like tab target to them. And the way around the flagging system was if you were close enough to auto attack them, you could auto attack them and then you could tab target to them. So I'm not totally sure what was going on there, but if you flagged up, it worked. We still received EXP debt when we died. That's just the EXP debt system being the EXP debt system. You get EXP debt for everything. But we were max leveled and it was not a real concern. So like I mentioned, you're not able to teleport to the capture points that you had captured. And anytime that you were near a capture point, it would kind of spam the screen, which I'm sure everyone saw in the test with the messages. Attackers are trying to capture this point, or defenders are trying to capture this point, or defenders are channeling this point, or attackers are channeling this point. I don't believe there was a timer associated with the siege. So we were told it was supposed to be an hour long. We were in there for about an hour, but there was no on-screen timer. There was nothing that indicated to us how long we had or how long we would be able to, you know, is it time to rally for one last push, or what kind of time frame are we working with? We had no indication of that at all. We essentially played for about an hour and then we were teleported out. The Flame Dragon, he could not be damaged, but he could be aggroed. And that presented unique problems with the fact that the Flame Dragon would drop his fire on our spawn. The attacker spawn, I was on the attacker side. And that would just, as we spawned, would just burn us to death. Because as you spawned, you would land in the fire and would just die because it was really bad and it was a lot of damage. But again, that's just a simple, that's going to be a bug fix associated with the aggro. He also spawned, I believe they're called burning images, which would aggro people. Like you could aggro them all the way up into the defender's keep. So there were some bugs associated with respawning as well. If you did not immediately click the respawn button, you would still respawn in about 6 seconds, I think, or 10 seconds. And then you would still have the resurrect option on your screen. Now, clicking it did nothing, but it will auto respawn you, and there is nothing you can do. Although you can get rezzed still in the fights, but you respawn with no HP and no mana. So pretty bad spot. When you respawn, on the attacker's side, I can't say I ever had this happen on the defender's side, but on the attacker's side, when you respawned, if you mounted up too quickly, you would fall through the world. This is not unfamiliar to us, so you know to demount and Control T, and it will put you back above the world, so it's not that big of a deal. So let's talk about the differences that we see with these bugs in the 300 person versus the 100 person. So the 100 person, the frame hitching was nearly gone, versus the 300 person. I had very little frame hitching at all in the 100 person test. In the 300 person test, forgot to mention one bug. The trebuchets, when they were hit by a mount, would just be yeeted. They would either clip into the ground, and then you would fall into the ground, and your tune would be pretty much, you'd have to go to character select and then come back and join the party because your tune is just, or come back and join the PvP because your tune would be pretty much inoperable. Or they would fly into the sky, and the same thing would happen. One time I also had it happen that someone hit my trebuchet with a mount, and it just destroyed my trebuchet. But that did not bug me in any way, so I wasn't too worked up about it. It just destroyed it, and it popped me off to the side. So when you're on a trebuchet and it gets destroyed, you just pop off to the side, it burns, and you keep going. In the 100 person test, we did not have any of that. Now, whether that was because of us knowing to avoid it, or if it was because the server was handling the 100 people better, I'm not sure. But in the 100 person test, I can't say I noticed any of the trebuchets, going through the floor or flying into the sky. With the 100 person test, 50 of us, as you saw in the video, went over to fight the ice dragon. 50 of us were not going to kill that ice dragon. That ice dragon was designed for more people than 50. Especially 50 level 15s. Although I know that the combat has been kind of bastardized a little bit in the skills that we get at 15. But we were not going to kill that dragon. The dragon was fun. The dragon was really, he looked beautiful. He looked great. I didn't get to look at him much because I was in between his legs tanking him. But I did get to see it in the video, and the dragon looks amazing. One of his attacks does not seem to do damage. The ice sliding across the floor comes in. You have to avoid it. It comes in like 5 rows, and then there's spots between the rows that you can hide, and then it comes in 5 columns, and there's spots between the columns you can hide. It didn't seem to do damage. These seem to be, some of the attacks seem to be upscaled versions of the ice dragon, and similarly the poison dragon that can be found in the wild. Seem to be upscaled versions with much more damage and much harder to deal with. But they each had unique attacks that I hadn't seen before, even though I've killed both of those dragons in the overworld. So that was really cool and really fun, getting to see some new unique attacks, specifically the stuff with the icicles, and when he would like fly up and he did the breath attack in a circle that was outside of his base, so you were supposed to run to him and to avoid the attack. There's also some interesting thing with the icicles surrounding people. I don't know if the intention is to later, maybe tanks are supposed to pull them out of that with the chain, or either way, there was some new interesting mechanics with the dragons. But the 50 of us were not going to kill that dragon. So we wiped, and then we go back and fight on the PvP side of things again. Now the 50 v 50 was a little bit of a show being put on. Obviously, as defenders and attackers, we would never go outside the gates and line up in a nice line and then charge at each other. But it looked great, and it illustrated that the servers handled that really well, right? Those 50 people slamming into each other, or those 100 people slamming into each other, and axe lobs going everywhere, and people getting chained across, or chained like 5 times into their back line. The server handled it really well. I, again, even in that instance, didn't notice any hitching. or any sort of lag while we were fighting that specific area. So that is the thoughts on the systems and what worked and what didn't work. Mainly what worked. There was very little that didn't work in that test. It was really impressive to me, actually. I enjoyed it. It was good fun. We got to just kind of mess around and PvP for a while, with no real concern on it. So let's talk about some things that need to be adjusted in the siege for it to be, I think, where they want it to get. So I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about map design, map scale, throne room concept, the 250 v 250, and some balancing aspects, specifically of siege equipment. So map design. There was a lot of single choke points in that map that we played on. It was very, very defender favored, because they could just stand on top of a choke point, and you had to run into them and attack them, and there was no reason for them to move anywhere. So that's something. Map design is going to be very, very important for the actual siege maps that come out. I don't know if the intention. Well, I'll get into that in a second. The designs will have to be very deliberate and very, very thoroughly tested to ensure that there is a good balance for attackers and for defenders, not favoring one side too much. There is another issue with this map specifically that has existed. You could walk along the back cliff, and you could fall into the keep onto their second line, and then you could go up into the keep and attack the throne room door immediately without attacking any of the other gates previously. So again, just some design stuff that has to be, maybe you throw up a wall there or something so that people can't get in there. So map scale. So I don't know if the intention with this map was it's a smaller scale map that's just for some little quick testing, but for 250 v 250, that map, in my opinion, is much too small. With just the 300 person test, there would just be 100 people standing at the top of this one choke point, and what can you do into that, right? Even if you group your whole 150 people, that's an unfavorable battle for you going into them. So the scale, it will need to be much larger. And you want to see a lot of utilization of the 250 people, right? So the 250 people, you most likely, in the early stages of the game at least, you aren't going to have 250 max geared people. You're not going to have 250 kitted PvPers. You might, if you're a large guild, have 100 or have maybe even 150. But 250 is a lot of people. So proper utilization of these people is going to need to be important, whether it be life skilling, giving you the advantage to build better trebuchets or build better ballista or build stronger gates or repair the gates. Something for other people to do who aren't so heavily invested into PvP. Because the PvP is, if you are so severely outgeared to anyone in any game, really, it would take several of a lower geared people to be able to match you. So I'd really like to see some systems implemented into the siege tests. That is, this guy has chopped down 150 trees and made 100 bows, and they're able to make an improvement on the ballista, or some kind of PvE life skilling reward for the people who aren't the hardcore PvPers, or even the PvEers who are grinding their gear and have really good gear and are able to just one-shot people. So 250 v 250 is going to need utilization of people, and hopefully on that kind of large scale, right? Because if you put someone on a ballista, it doesn't matter what gear they have at that point, because they're just shooting a ballista into a crowd, which is the ballista's damage. So seeing some utilization for those people who may not be fully geared would be great. The throne room concept. So the current concept on how you win is, the only win condition is you get to the throne room and you have 5 people in that throne room for, they said 3 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. That's how you won, was you get all those people into the throne room. I'm not sure if it is like a control point thing where you need to have, if they have 5 people, you need to have 10 people. If they have 10 people, you need to have 15 people. But that current design, I don't really think would work in a large scale PvP aspect, because one, currently their spawn is right next to the throne room. So of course, if we take 10 times the amount of time to get to the throne room, then essentially they have 10 times the manpower coming out of their spawn. And two, if you crammed 500 people into that room, it is going to be a mess. You may, or I may like to see a system that involves more of a tug of war system, where each team maybe starts with 2 points and they war over a third point, or maybe there's 7 points total, where there's 5 points kind of attacker spawn, defender spawn, one right in front of the attacker spawn, one right in front of the defender spawn, like throne room, and then maybe the fire dragon den, and then one in the middle, so say the front gate or the courtyard of the castle, and then 2 off to the sides, and maybe there's a domination aspect going into it where you're earning points for the amount of control points that you hold, or you're and if you go back and capture all the way to their spawn, it's an instant win, or essentially an instant win. It starts ticking at like 500 points up every 10 seconds or something. Either way, I think the idea of the throne room is very aesthetically pleasing, but in terms of mechanics of the actual how effective is this going to be to see who's the ruler of this area, realistically, if all you can hold is a throne room, you're not the ruler of the area, right? If they capture every other point and they hold the whole city, they win. But thematically it feels nice, but I do think it needs some kind of adjustment to be more of a tug of war system that is, how much of the castle do you own, or maybe there's some kind of penalty for if they win, but they only win by this much. Either way, that is a much further down the line decision. But it is something that should be on people who are testing's mind. You should think about, what kind of suggestions can we give, or what kind of maybe not what kind of suggestions can we give, but pay attention when you're playing to what feels nice and what feels rewarding, and how you what you get the most enjoyment out of. And in my opinion, the current system will need at least some attention. And lastly, let's wrap it up by talking about siege equipment. The balancing of the siege equipment. So this is the one balance thing that I had. Trebuchets are nuts. Trebuchets can shoot as far as you can see, and they shoot in basically a straight line. There is very little attention to be had with trebuchets, or sorry, with ballistas. Ballistas are nuts. The trebuchets are a little weaker for sure. The trebuchets are maybe more effective once you get past the first and second gate and you're fighting for that third gate, for that throne room area. Then lining your trebuchets up on the outside and launching some rocks into those big crowds of defenders standing on those single choke points. That's really effective, and that's something that was really, really easy and really important to do while we were attacking, because you could give a huge advantage to the defenders, and the defenders can no longer use their siege equipment on the attackers at that point in the siege. But until that point, trebuchets are useless. We never took out a gate with a trebuchet. They would die far too fast. Every gate was taken down by auto attacks, because the ballistas can't aim straight down at you, and so you can just go out and whack the gate until they realize, oh crap, we can't aim straight down, so we have to jump out and attack them. But by that time, we'd already gotten the gates. So trebuchets and ballistas need some work. I think trebuchets, it's fine for trebuchets to be useless that early in the raid and become useful later. But if that is the intention for them, I think they should do more heavy damage. You know, if a player's max health pool is 1,000 and we're doing 200 damage with a trebuchet, we're only doing a fifth of their HP pool. And if it's supposed to be a large advantage for you to help get you that throne room, because really once you get inside the throne room, the trebuchets again become useless. So it's really only effective at its current stage in that one little point of you've gotten the second gate, but you haven't yet gotten the throne room. That's where your trebuchets are really useful. And so it's only doing 200 damage to people, and you can crit up to like maybe 500. I think maybe they should be reevaluated, and either I think probably not adjusted the number, but adjusted the area of effect that you're doing with that. I think the number is pretty spot on, right? Doing a fourth to a fifth of a person's HP with a large trebuchet makes sense of a max HP. Because if I line up 3 trebuchets and I'm launching at the same time, that's going to be a ton of damage coming down, right? Now, obviously, the defenders are going to organize and do some kind of counterattack on that, but that would be a large push in advantageous momentum. But currently, the trebuchets are maybe a little weak for what you would think they would be. Ballistas are great, but again, have limited usefulness. Because of their limited 45-degree turning, there is no way for a defender to turn that ballista around to attack people inside their castle. This is good for the attackers, because it means once they get past that second wall, they don't have to worry about ballistas anymore. I think ballistas are in a good spot, but maybe should do increased damage, have lower range for sure, for God's sake, and have maybe increased damage to other siege equipment. So when they're hitting a trebuchet specifically, they'll do more than 200 damage. Because when it came down to it, the real way that you would destroy the trebuchets was you would send people out to go auto attack the trebuchets. Because 200 damage every couple seconds isn't really going to do it when you can auto for 200 damage with one auto combo. You'd just much rather send some attackers out or some defenders out and just destroy them. Anyways, that has been my thoughts on Siege. Overall, it was fun, and I was really impressed by where it already is. I thought for sure it would be much more broken and much more inaccessible or unplayable, but it really was. Most of the systems worked, and they need some touching up, and you want to see some adjustment and some inclusion of some new systems or some other systems to allow for different types of players to be effective in that, because like I said, you're not going to have, at least early game stages, you're probably not going to have 250 max geared people. So allowing some life skillers or some people to have real influence in that would be great, and seeing some inclusion for some systems to that would also be great. Overall, a good time, an impressive time, not too much lag, really good first showing for sure, first public showing for sure, and I'm happy to have been a part of it and been able to record a video for you guys. Thanks, and I look forward to maybe another one at the next benchmark of sieges, or the next big benchmark that comes out, whatever that may be, maybe the combat system. Thanks a bunch. See you guys later.